thing to speak about. The way that I thought to structure it was talking about what, when, and why, but in terms of if you're just starting out, and then if you can hold your own. So that means you've had a couple of journeys or maybe a lot of journeys and you can actually hold yourself in that space. You kind of understand. I call it like you have your sea legs. Like you jump in the ocean for the first time and now you've kind of got your legs and you know how to walk around in this new realm. And then the last one would be for your experienced psychonauts. And that's like, as I said, you've gone in, you've been restructured, received your downloads, living the new life path, all of that's already happened. And you're still going in for deeper and deeper work. How do we navigate the psychedelic realm, and how do we know when to go towards what? And at any time, you guys are also just welcome to throw in questions, ask me something if you don't understand, and yeah, we can just go from there. Is that all cool? Cool, good. So when it comes to starting out, there's a couple of things that I thought would be cool to speak about. One is mushrooms, because in South Africa, that's by far the biggest psychedelic in use at the moment, especially for people that are starting out. There's the highest concentration of facilitators as well, who are mushroom facilitators, and that's also because there isn't that much of a strong lineage. So a lot of people are doing a lot of journeys themselves, and eventually they start learning from others, and eventually they become space holders over hundreds of journeys. And that's kind of what we're seeing happening in South Africa. Or people are starting to hold space for each other, for family members, or for themselves. And there is a little bit of a lower risk when it comes to mushrooms than with some of the other psychedelics, which we will speak about. And there's something also called microdosing, which we'll speak into as well, which is another way which people tend to start. And I've had everyone from people wanting it for their teenagers that are struggling and don't want to put them onto allopathic medication, to my grandma in hospital telling me that she heard from the grand next to her about this thing called microdosing that she wanted to try. So it's really appearing in every place in South Africa you can imagine. And that's also just because, I don't know if you've seen like the new Silicon Valley thing saying how it improves productivity and creativity, and it's great for depression. And yeah, it is really phenomenal for a lot of things, and we still don't know the full extent of what microdosing can be used for. Period pain, cluster headaches, it really does kind of go on and on. And every day I learn something new. Someone comes to me and they start microdosing and they're like, oh, it turns out I came for this, but this thing is now changing in my life as well. So we'll speak into about microdosing. And then I thought about speaking about San Pedro and MDMA, and that I'll speak about in the starting out, where to orient during your early stages of starting with psychedelics. So I will add the disclaimer in that please take everything I say with a pinch of salt. Feel what resonates for you. Like, this is also coming from my personal experience, in my opinion, and also my experience from my point of view. So I always say that at the end of the day, this work is really about coming back into your intuition. So even when working with a facilitator, I always tell people when I guide them to a facilitator, it doesn't matter what anyone in the world says. If it doesn't resonate for you, if it doesn't feel like truth in your body, don't accept it. It's not for you then. So listen, but feel what feels right for you. And if I say to you that mushrooms are good for a beginner and you've had this very strong calling and you've had dreams about iboga, then please follow the call. Please follow the call, because that is your soul speaking to you in words that I can never override. So, mushrooms. So mushrooms are psilocybin mushrooms, often called shrooms, and so in the category of psychedelic mushrooms, there are many varieties, but in South Africa, we mainly use psilocybe cubensis. Psilocybe cubensis is actually how it's said. It's a really weird name. And that's the mushrooms, and when you squeeze them, they tend to go blue. That's how you can often identify them. And they are literally like a physical mushroom. Can I actually just ask, is there anyone here who's never done a psychedelic in your life? Okay, cool. So there are a couple of you that have never done a psychedelic. Cool. So it is a physical mushroom. A lot of people don't actually realize that. They think it's like something else. It's literally a mushroom that grows from the ground. So it looks like a mushroom, and it does have blue markings on it. And mushrooms can be used in many different dosages, and understanding what dosage is right for you is really the place to start. So there are typically different types of journeys. The one is a microdose, which is a sub-perceptual dose of a psychedelic, which means you're taking so little that it shouldn't actually create a outwards experience. You shouldn't be tripping, but it is starting to do things on the internal landscape. So the main thing that microdosing does is it improves neuroplasticity and also neurogenesis. That's basically the brain's ability to start forming new neural pathways. So it can help us form new patterns in our lives in a much easier way. So our brains currently, we have like, they often use like the snow analogy. When you have a sled that's been going down the snow again and again and again, it tends to fall into the same groove. And it's very difficult to like form a new groove just because it's so deep now. And what microdosing and what psychedelics do in general is it tends to help that snowfall fall back again. And suddenly you've got a new plane to form new pathways down the slope. And so it allows us to get out of old patterns in a much easier way and start forming patterns and learning at a much quicker rate, start forming connections at a quicker rate. And so that's why, for example, if people are microdosing for anxiety or depression or for improving learning or wanting to see things in a new way for business, it tends to help us just have that plasticity to actually start regaining new ways of being again and start to spark up some of those old feelings that have kind of gone away as well. And then from a microdosing level, and that's generally quite tolerable and quite safe for most people and quite tolerable with most medications as well. When you start working upwards in dosage with any psychedelic, you have to then start being mindful of what medication you're on. So chronic medication and psychiatric medication, it's ideal to work with a facilitator or someone who knows what they're doing and just being mindful to make sure that none of your medication is contraindicated, just so that you are physically also safe. Because some psychedelics, they increase your heart rate, they do a bunch of things, just keep yourself safe with that. But at microdosing levels, most people are 100% fine. And then from a microdose, we work up into what we call like a recreational dose or an entry-level dose. And that is like your 1 to 2 gram dosage. And that is like what you'd often see people at parties having, not that I'm speaking about that, but that is generally the kind of dosage when people are having like very philosophical conversations and they're out in nature and they're starting to see things in a new way. They might be seeing some patterns starting to emerge. And that's generally the dose where I often say to people, if you apprehensive and you want to start out, it's a good place to start, somewhere in the garden or with a loved one who can watch over you. And that's really, it's a good space to start with an introspective practice and starting to understand the psychedelic terrain. So if you're learning what it is to be on the psychedelic and see how you respond, that's kind of the introductory level dose to start feeling something. And then as you start working up from your 3 gram to your 5 gram range is what I consider a high dose. And that's where you would like to be a little bit more cautious, because then it becomes more of a therapeutic level experience. And it's not necessarily something you're going to be walking around in your garden to. It's more like flat on your back, really processing things. It is also different. Everyone has a slightly different tolerance. But that's kind of the range in which I would recommend starting to work with a facilitator, or at least someone with experience who can be there for you for that process. On 1 gram, a lot of the time people have really big releases. It can also be a very beautifully emotional experience. Sometimes it's the first time you're connecting to your inner self, your true desires, your heart. And so it can be very therapeutic and very beautiful. But often when people are going in for what I call like soul initiation or really going into their psyche to dig up deep traumas, that's your 3 to 5 gram range. And so most people who facilitate mushrooms in South Africa would be a 3 to 5 gram level facilitator. More often than not, it will be a 5 gram, so a hero's dose journey. And many people choose to do a hero's dose for their first experience. And and there's different schools of thought. I'm of the school of thought. I say that you walk, and you first learn to crawl, and then you walk, and then you run, and then you fly. But there are some people say that, especially if you're coming in for something deep and you're looking to move past the ego, the idea is to go in and you just cut straight through. There's no chance for the ego to cling on. You go straight through, you reconnect all the way back to your deepest parts, and then you come back and then you integrate that experience. And, often when people have these experiences, if you're well prepared, I work with people that go in for 5 grams and they know they're coming in, they want to do a 5 gram experience. The idea there is if you're well prepared, chances are you will have a good experience. But really preparation is key, because when you meet that moment of intensity, there's no tapping out of this experience, like, can you come back to your breath? Can you be present? Or are you going to cover yourself with a blanket and say no, and start screaming and kicking and trying to get out of the experience? Because once you're in, there's no one else to say no to. It's you versus you. So really being prepared to, and it's not to scare you. Often it's a very beautiful experience, but just speaking to some of the times when it isn't that beautiful for people and it's very difficult, and suddenly things are coming up and they're actually not ready to face them and they want to put them back again, and then it's too late. Now it's up. And with psychedelics, unlike alcohol, once you bring something to the surface, there's no forgetting tomorrow. Once you open the box and you see truth is there. And then it's your responsibility to step into it. The biggest problem I see with psychedelics is a lack of integration. So often people will come and they'll have like this big, expansive experience. They'll see truth. They'll see themselves in a whole new way, their environment. They'll see what's wrong with their relationships. But then they go back into their life afterwards and then they don't make any change. And then I call it the gap, where the gap between where you know yourself to be and where you want to be and where you are is so large that it actually ends up causing like a depression. And so it's about also recognizing that if you're not going to do the work as well with this kind of journey work and this deep, really sacred inner work, it can actually lead to a bad experience, is what people call it, or a very challenging experience that takes a long time to actually heal from. And so it's about making sure that you're well prepared, you're well informed, your body feels safe, you have some tools. Coming back to your breath, I say if you meditated before, it's a great thing to be able to do. Make sure that you're well informed. There's no part of you that feels like, oh wait, I wasn't prepared for this. Like, you're informed, you understand what's going to happen to you. And and then going in with an open heart, surrender, and chances are you'll end up having the most beautiful experience. Yeah, so that's a little bit about mushrooms, just touching on it.
Where'd you buy them?
I cannot tell you that. But I can tell you that chances are, if you spend enough time with people that are at yoga studios or places like this, you'll be able to find your way around quite easily. I also say that like when the call comes, chances are you'll end up just meeting someone, I've had people that they had the call for iboga is a very strong call, or ayahuasca. They don't really know anyone, and they're just like, I have this call, I don't know what to do. And like a week later, they'll just like strike up a conversation with someone, and will come up, and then within a week they're directed. So they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and it's the same thing when it comes to psychedelics. It really just it comes when the time is ready and the alignment is there. So, speaking a little bit about MDMA. So MDMA is not a typical psychedelic. It's empathogen, which means that it doesn't have the same visionary experience that a lot of psychedelics have. It can bring up emotions, but it tends to be a very heart-opening experience. And it allows us to connect in a much deeper way, often to others, but also deeply to ourselves. And the reason why I'm bringing MDMA up is just because there is something called MDMA therapy, which will be something to look into. But for those that have severe trauma, that are wanting to do a hero's dose journey of psilocybin because they've heard that it's really healing and it can really help with trauma, often it is very healing and very helpful. But if the system is not prepared to deal with that, and there's a lot of PTSD, a lot of like nervous system related triggering that happens, then sometimes MDMA can actually be a better way to go. Because it tends to connect you to your heart center. You end up feeling a lot of love and empathy for yourself. And when that trauma comes up with someone who can hold the space with you, you can look at that trauma with a loving eye. It's not going to send you into these like really, with mushrooms, it's a full spectrum of light and dark. It can send you straight into the darkness, and part of the medicine is to work yourself out of the darkness, which is powerful medicine, but for some people they might not actually be ready for that yet. And so going in with something where there's a lot more, it's just loving, it's open, and it's a lot more gentle, can be a better way to go when you're dealing with severe trauma or PTSD. So MDMA is something that they use it for PTSD, especially for war veterans. It's often so I just want to add that in as a disclaimer, because we have a lot of people that are coming in just to be mindful of the options. Yeah, and it's not to say that if you do the one, you can't do the other. It's just understanding that it's a journey. It's a process. And then I wanted to speak into, I'm going to keep track of my time, I'm good, San Pedro. So San Pedro is cactus medicine, and there actually is some down there if you want to know where to get it, growing over there. It's completely legal to grow in South Africa, so you often see it as people have it as ornamental plants. And it comes from South America. And it's also an entheogenic brew. It is not the nicest thing you'll ever taste in your life. It's quite bitter. And part of its medicine is very resilient. Like, it's a very resilient medicine in the way that the cactus is in the sun, and it's got its thorns, and it can survive in very harsh conditions. When you process the medicine, it also has that tough process to it. The skinning of it, the dethorning, the cooking for hours and hours and hours on end. It's quite a process to engage with the medicine in general. And as you put that energy into the process, it tends to also give you that energy back. So if you want to think about it, like, you can think about it intuitively. If you'd like to learn that kind of inner strength, that resilience, San Pedro is really the teacher. He's also known as a great grandfather, so you can think about that masculine energy coming in. That's kind of an energy that you'd think about doing. Typically, San Pedro is normally done out in nature, so people often go for hikes. I've also facilitated San Pedro with my partner. And we've done them indoors, so we'll go for a hike for a short while. And with high doses, also you might want to lay down for a period of time. You might feel a little bit out of sorts, and you want to just go straight into your journey. It tends to be a little bit more grounding than mushrooms and other psychedelics. Not that it can't give you a completely visionary and out-of-body experience, but for the most part, people tend to feel a bit more grounded, a bit more here during the journey. Things are coming up. The insights are more like things dawning on you, rather than with mushrooms, where it can be very visions and out-of-body experiences, lots of body releases. And again, each psychedelic experience is different for most people, but this is just a generalization. So if you want something that's like a bit more grounding, a bit more like resilience building, maybe you're very connected to nature and you want to connect more deeply to nature, then San Pedro is also a really great one, and often very good for people that are starting out on their psychedelic journey. Yeah, and you can also then pace it. It tends to be a friendlier energy as well. So that's a little bit about San Pedro. And are there any questions just on what I've done so far?
MDMA. I don't know what that is.
So MDMA is a synthetic chemical. It's not a plant-based. It's not. Yes. So it would be it's normally in crystal form. It is the active ingredient. Have you heard of ecstasy before?
Yes.
So at parties they have ecstasy. Ecstasy is normally MDMA mixed with amphetamines or something else, and that's used in the party scene. I'm speaking about MDMA when it's in its pure form, normally used in a therapeutic setting. Yeah. So that's what MDMA is, and it's actually it's an empathogen, like I said. So it's not a typical psychedelic. But it's at the moment, it's actually the one in the States, I think, that's the furthest along in terms of getting to be legalized for use, for therapeutic use. Yes?
What did you just call it, an empathogen?
Yes.
I've not heard that term before. Can you tell me about that?
Empathy.
Yeah, it increases...
Generating more empathy.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. So it increases our level of empathy. So one thing to note, they often call it the love drug. So people often just feel this like a big abundance of love. I must just add a word of caution on doing it in group environments, is that if you fall in love on MDMA, by all means enjoy it, but just hold your wits about you. Hold your wits about you. I've heard some funny cases of only the wife going to the journey and then falling in love with someone else at the the kind of we won't go there, but you get the gist. Is you will fall in love with everything and everyone, and that is incredibly profound. But that is the medicine. It's just showing you the love that you hold inside you, and that is profound. And then the journey is to cultivate that love on a daily basis outside of the experience, to integrate that love back into your life. So that's the medicine of MDMA. Yeah.
So MDMA increases your serotonin, right? So
Yes.
What does psychedelic actually do in your brain? You talked about neuroplasticity, but what happens in terms of neurotransmitters in your brain when you take that psychedelic?
So I'm not going to go too much into the science, just because I'm more on the spiritual side of things. I used to know a lot of the so when it comes to MDMA, it increases serotonin quite a lot, but they're actually starting to learn more about it, where part of, they always thought it was only serotonin based, but things like prolactin are also created, and that's actually one of the things that, it's one of the hormones that mothers have to help bond with their babies. So like our understanding, to be honest with you, is quite limited, but the ones to be mindful of, especially with medical contraindications with like antidepressants, is your serotonin your serotonin.
And then for the psychedelics, what do they do?
It depends on the psychedelics. A lot of them are also serotonin. So your tryptamines are serotonin. Then you have ones like iboga, which are really diverse. They do a lot of things all over in the body and the system. A lot of them, so each of them has their own complete cascade of what it does. And that's why I don't really go into the neuro of it. It's a lot more complicated than I thought. Yeah. And some of it we're only learning now that what we actually think is not actually the full truth. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to go on to the next little section, and that is if you've now come into a space of, one thing that I will mention when it comes to starting out is cacao, which is not a psychedelic at all. It's just a plant medicine. The reason why I thought to mention it is that if you'd like to be in a space where you're starting to engage with ceremony and you want to start just feeling into things, but in a way where you're not actually going to like go anywhere, then cacao is something that you can just look into doing. A cacao ceremony is very accessible. It can get you used to just the community and the lingo and consuming something in a ceremonial way. It's just a really nice, very all-welcoming, everyone's welcome kind of a space. So if you are looking at doing psychedelics and you have that hesitation, then maybe starting with a cacao ceremony first is like an easy way to start. And then I'm going to go into the category of now you're at a stage where you can hold your own. So we've spoken about when you're first starting out and your first couple of journeys. Now we're talking about those that have now done a couple of journeys, maybe a lot of journeys, and you kind of can navigate the psychedelic space quite effectively, and you understand your consciousness in quite a deep way. And the ones I'm going to be speaking about here are your ayahuasca, your iboga, and your changa. So ayahuasca and changa both operate with the same main molecule, which is called DMT, right? And they both work in quite different ways. So ayahuasca is a South American entheogenic brew from the Amazon. And it's a combination of Banisteropsis carpi and Psychodia viridis. So a plant that has MAOIs and a DMT-containing plant. So just to be mindful of when you're using ayahuasca, this is another psychedelic where you have to be very mindful of the medication that you're taking. Because essentially what MAOIs do is they take whatever you consume and enhance it in your body with certain substances. So it can actually enhance some of your medication in your system, and you might actually have the chance of overdosing by accident. So just being mindful, normally for 2 weeks in advance, you're weaning off basically everything, including things in your diet. Tryptophan-containing things like dairy as well have to leave the system. Often there's no meat involved, and that's got like a physical but also an energetic side of it. So we also start reducing some of the more dense things that we consume. So for example, if you think about your digestion time, things like meat is very heavy, it takes very long to process, whereas fruit is very high vibrational or light. It takes 20 minutes for it to start working in your system versus like 8 hours. So you start lightening yourself, because what these medicines do, they are also quite like high vibrational medicines, is they're going to send you, I say it's like rocket fuel, it sends you up into, into wherever you're going, into divinity. And if you have very heavy things in your system, it's just going to slow you down. So the lighter you can be, sometimes people even fast, depending on the medicine, it's going to just allow you to really just go through without anything really holding you back. Just a note on food as well is often, I often say we're clearing out the system from the noise. So think about chili and think about how noisy that it is when you eat chili. It's quite a loud substance. Everything that we consume has its own frequency, its own energy, its own noise in the system. And so the idea is to start reducing that noise in the system. So often with these, more intense plant medicines like your ayahuascas, the system is being cleared of a lot of the noise. So they end up, if you're going on a strict dieta, very bland food actually. Often it's like very, very bland food. No spices, I do talks as well around the other, and there was the eco-fluency here before about how other parts of nature also have a voice, and spices are also plant teachers that we overlook as well. And so you're clearing out a lot of the other teachers in your system to just make room for this new voice that's coming in, so that when it does come in, you're completely clear and you can actually hear what's going on, and you can hear that voice very clearly. So it's just a word on diet. And so ayahuasca is a little bit more of an intense experience. I often say I'll speak about it more from an energetic point of view. I often say this is when we're looking to do deep soul work and often deep levels of healing. So they often say that ayahuasca allows the little doctors in. And so people often have the experience of going in and they feel like different parts of their body are being worked on, being cleansed, different parts of their soul, it's like soul surgery in a sense, are really getting kind of operated on, going into deep traumas, bringing them to the surface, and sometimes allowing you to look into the cosmos, looking at how reality works, you know, where you come from, who are you? If you ever feel brave, ask that question. Who am I? And you might get some very interesting answers in an ayahuasca journey. So, and this as well, I just want to add, high-dose mushroom journeys can sometimes give you very similar answers to what ayahuasca does. At the end of the day, many of these substances are just permission slips for us to tap into that source consciousness. And they're just different paths to get there. Some are, I'll come to you now, some are like direct bullet paths, and some of them are more incremental, you can build up. So with mushrooms, I noticed with myself, it took me a while to build up to a place where I was communicating with different beings from different places or finding source information. You know, at first it was just speaking about my emotions or looking at my past or healing my mother wound. And eventually, as I got more curious, it started going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. You know, it's like an onion. We just keep going deeper in all these layers. And sometimes it's different. It's not linear as well. You might get an experience where you burst through and you're speaking to interdimensional beings, and the next one you're just like missing your childhood pet. And, you know, it's like really diverse in terms of where you go. And sometimes you might just be in joy. That's always the best experiences, but you know, for a couple hours. So it really is different. So I will speak about iboga as well. I'm sorry, I have to like. I'll come to your question. What were you going to say?
I wanted to ask if you could touch upon ego death and
Yeah.
dissolving the ego and rebuilding it and stuff.
Yes.
Especially with these high kind of doses.
Yes, thank you for that. That's exactly. So I will speak about iboga, and then I'll speak about how on high dose mushrooms, iboga, and ayahuasca, that's when you start stepping into the realm of ego death and rebirth experiences. And that's often something I say is something to work towards, or being mindful of the integration process afterwards. But you know, again, sometimes people they've gone through their own spiritual journey away from psychedelics, and they already know in their hearts that they're ready for a complete transition in their lives, and so they come in and their first journey is that ego death experience, and that's perfect. Sometimes I find souls that are really just purely ready for it because they've done work in other ways, whether it's through introspection, mindfulness, meditation, you know, yoga, whatever your path has been in life, crocheting. You know, go deep in that and you end up in weird places. So I just wanted to finish on Changa, just so you understand what Changa is. So ayahuasca is a South American brew. Changa is a much more new age thing, but it's essentially smokable DMT. And it lasts for about 15 minutes, and it's essentially the same compound. It doesn't have necessarily like the deep healing. You know, ayahuasca often comes with like the energy of like the mother or the snake that comes in and can go through the system. You can have like kundalini activations and awakenings, can go into your soul, show you things about you. Changa is like 15 minutes. It's like a slingshot all the way through the veil. You pop out somewhere and you kind of get pulled back. Sometimes, if there's messages that are just above the veil waiting for you to receive, then this can really just rip it open and allow those messages to come through, and then you're back to where you are now. For people that know that there's something there, but they've never experienced it, and they just want to know, then sometimes this experience can be very powerful for them, because it kind of shoots you there. You realize, oh shit, okay, yeah, there is something there, and it could just be that awakening for some people. It's not necessarily something that I say that you know this is what that you. I don't necessarily recommend it, but it's been very powerful for a lot of people, especially when they're not ready to go into some of those deep journeys, but they want to look past the veil, right? They want to see what's on the other side. So I will speak into just iboga, which is African, and iboga is a root bark, and this one I always say to people, unless you very specifically have the call, it's not something where you're just like, yeah, okay, I think I'm going to try this with my friends on the weekend. I'd say it's a much more intense experience. It often lasts for a couple days. So just being mindful. And this is obviously like on a full dose of iboga. And for me, this is when the calling has come to start rewriting parts of yourself. So iboga kind of goes in. Often people experience I've had people say like they go through a filing cabinet and they take parts of their mind and they look at them and they're like, this no longer serves me, and they throw it out. And that's amazing. Like, how incredible is that? Except when you come back and that you realize that like 50% of your personality was based on that file that you just threw out. And you have to rebuild yourself without that fundamental part of who you were. And the things that were related to that one little file that you threw out was your relational dynamics. So suddenly you don't feel the same way about your partner that you used to. You don't really like the place that you live anymore. You don't know why you do the job, So I'm just saying this with caution. Sometimes this is exactly what you're looking for, but sometimes it's not. And once you kind of open that can of worms and you throw out some of these files and you go into your soul and you clear out, in my opinion, it's often for the best, because you're really just coming into deeper layers of finding your true self. But also, like, life is a journey. It's not a sprint to get to the end and try and get as clean as possible. We got a long way, So it's about also just like taking it easy and at your own time, in your own pace, in your own way. And when it does come, it can be absolutely glorious. With these higher doses, and this is, I'll speak into just the ego death experience. And so, ego death is essentially just the experience of that idea of who you are, who you know yourself to be, your name, your structure, the way you live, all your associations in life, sometimes comes to die. And it can feel very much like a real death. There's often in the experience, there is no differentiation between I am dying right now and oh no, this is just an experience that I'm having. It is a fully embodied experience of death. And this can be very powerful for people, because often they go through this experience and on the other side they realize that death is safe, death is okay. But it can also be very challenging, because especially if you're like unprepared, like I was, suddenly you get told that, you have to say goodbye to everything you've ever known, to everyone you've ever loved, to all the places you've been to the whole life that you've lived, to your name. And that can be very scary. That can be quite something. It's quite a tender moment to just acknowledge the life that you've lived and who you've been and who you've been with, and to suddenly have to say goodbye to that. At the end of the day, we are eternal beings, and so at the other side is always going to be the sense of safety and something new that will form, but also just recognizing that this is an experience that might come up. And often I find it's when people on a deeper level are calling for that ultimate release. I always say that when you reach these moments, the only way to go through is to surrender, because at the end of the day, death is waiting for all of us, and sometimes we can die more than once in a human lifetime, which is the incredible part of working with these medicines as well, is sometimes we can go through a death of who we think we are into a new level of who it is we're becoming. And they often call that the journey of becoming, coming back into truer and truer layers of yourself and shading the parts of you that no longer serve. And I can tell you now that often when you go through these experiences, you'll come out on the other side, and there'll be, like neurologically, a great amount of neuroplasticity. New pathways are forming at an alarming rate, and physically things are changing. People are shifting out of your life; they don't resonate anymore. People are shifting in. Things are really adapting. But the things that are meant for you, for this human life, will continue. So if there are people in your life, there are projects that are really meant for you, they will stay. Not everything is going to shift out. And so there is a trust that the things that are meant for me will come back, and that's okay. And if they don't, then they weren't meant for me, and that's okay too. And with that, often there is a level of grief that we have to come to terms with when doing this work. It's a symptom of love, right? We let go of something and there's a loss, and the system's way of dealing with something that's lost is to grieve. Our tears are related to our hormones, and I always say for every mental and spiritual component there is a physical component as well. And so when we let go of something, there often has to be the physical letting go as well. So we release through our tears, through our grief, through our emotions, through our processing, through our breath, our sound, our movement, our whatever that process is for you. And so just coming to terms with, that sometimes with these big releases, there is a period of grief that follows afterwards. And it's encouraged to just be with that process as much as possible. And then just speaking with these bigger plant medicine journeys is sometimes you go in and it's more just like a cleanup, a checkup. I will just go into now speaking into a little bit of as an experienced psychonaut. So as you develop in your consciousness, your relationship with a lot of these medicines does change. And so whereas ayahuasca, and again, it's not linear. It's not always linear. Ayahuasca, for me, used to be this like earth-shattering experience, like every time, and it would take me ages to integrate and get my nervous system back in order. And now, often when I go, it's like a check-in, kind of like, see, you've picked up some spiritual worms from people that you've been working with. You're not being very clean with yourself and your empathy, and just kind of like cleans me out and checks me and gives me some tasks to do, gives me some homework, plant spirits I need to go speak to, sends me on my way. And that's because I've developed a sort of relationship with ayahuasca where I've started sitting up in the journey, communicating with her in a different way. So my relationship over the years has really changed with the plant spirits. And it does change. Sometimes I'm like, thank you, teacher. And sometimes I'm like, hey, like, please, So it's dynamic when we start working in these different ways.
Thank you so much for sharing so beautifully about all of these plants. Could you speak a little bit more about, because I think I know what you mean when you talk about those worms and any other potentially harmful interference, let's probably call it that, and how being in that space could also be, I don't know, more than just beneficial.
Sure. So you're saying in that space, just being able to be like clean.
So when you're dropping your shield, so to say, and now you talk about picking up these energetic worms,
Yeah.
any kind of entities or energies, and so how that could be from everyday lives that you're clearing up with working with these teacher plants, for example. But what happens in that space if it's not strongly held and you pick up stuff within that space while the teacher plant's working?
So it's a big conversation to have, and there's very many different schools of thought. So some people have developed a structure that's strong enough that nothing ever touches them. Like their belief structure, and it depends on your belief structures here as well, is firm enough to know that they are divinely safe at every moment, and that there's nothing that is